She wore a servant's cloak to hide from him, unaware he had been searching for her for 2 years. She was nobody. Or at least, that is what she told herself every morning when she pinned her hair beneath a plain cotton cap and pulled a borrowed cloak over her shoulders. He was everything. The kind of man whose name silenced a ballroom when he entered it, whose gaze could freeze a conversation from 30 paces, whose reputation was built not on cruelty, but on something far more unsettling: patience. They met once, on a night neither of them was supposed to remember. She vanished before the music ended. He never stopped listening for her voice. For 2 years, she kept one rule above all others: never be in the same room as him again. For 2 years, he kept one mission above all others: find her. Tonight, both of those promises shatter, and the thing that finally gives her away is the very disguise she chose to keep herself hidden. This is not a story about a girl who ran. This is a story about a girl who believed she had to, and the man who crossed every room, every city, every silence, to prove she was wrong. If you love stories that wrap around your heart and refuse to let go, subscribe now, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from, and settle in. This one will stay with you long after it ends. The candles in the Ashford ballroom burned low and gold, their light pooling on the marble floor like spilled honey. 300 guests filled the vast hall, their laughter rising and falling in waves that crashed against the vaulted ceiling and came back softer, turned into something like music. It was the first masquerade of the winter season, and Lady Ashford had outdone herself. The chandeliers wore garlands of dried roses and ivy. The orchestra played behind a curtain of sheer white silk, so that the music seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, like a memory you could almost name. Masks covered every face. That was the rule. That was the point. For one night, the rigid walls of society were supposed to dissolve. Titles did not matter. Reputations did not matter. You were only what your voice revealed and what your body confessed when the violins slowed and someone asked you to dance. Elara Wynne had not planned to attend. She was 20 years old, the daughter of a country physician who had died the previous spring, leaving behind a small stone house, an enormous library, and debts that turned out to be larger than both. Her mother had taken work as a seamstress for a modest dress shop in the village of Thornfield, and Elara had become her assistant, measuring fabric, stitching hems, delivering finished gowns to the grand houses that dotted the countryside like jewels sewn into green cloth. She was not poor, exactly. She was something harder to name. She was a girl who had once read books by candlelight in her father's study and discussed philosophy over breakfast, who now spent her days on her knees with a mouthful of pins, adjusting the skirts of women who did not bother to learn her name. She was invisible, and she had almost made peace with it. Almost. The invitation to the masquerade had come by accident. Lady Ashford had ordered 6 gowns for herself and her daughters, and when the final fitting ran late, the youngest Ashford girl, a cheerful, careless creature named Bess, had pressed a silver-edged card into Elara's hand and said, "Come tonight. Everyone wears masks. No one will know. It will be fun." Elara had refused. She had refused again when her mother found the invitation and held it up to the window light as though it were made of something precious. She had refused a 3rd time when her own reflection stared back at her from the darkened shop window, pale and serious and 20 years old, with nothing ahead of her but more pins and more hems and more women who looked through her as if she were made of glass. But that night, alone in the small room above the shop, she had pulled a dress from the reject pile, a deep midnight blue gown that a customer had returned because the color was too dramatic, and she had tried it on. The fabric fell around her like water, and for the first time in months, she did not look invisible. She looked like someone who had a story worth telling. She went. The mask she wore was simple, made of dark blue silk that matched the dress, tied with a ribbon at the back of her head. It covered her from forehead to cheekbones and left her mouth and jaw exposed. She told herself she would stay for 1 hour. She would listen to the music, drink 1 glass of punch, and leave before anyone could ask her a question she could not answer. 1 hour. That was all. She lasted 11 minutes before he found her. Or perhaps it was more accurate to say that they found each other. The way 2 people moving through a crowd will sometimes turn at the same moment and lock eyes, as though the rest of the room has simply ceased to exist. He was standing near the far wall, half in shadow, a glass of wine in his hand that he had not touched. His mask was black, unadorned, covering the upper half of a face that was all sharp angles and restrained intensity, a jaw that looked carved from something harder than bone, a mouth that seemed designed for silence. He was tall, broad-shouldered in a way that his dark evening coat could not disguise, and he stood with the particular stillness of a man who was used to being watched and had long ago decided not to perform for the watchers. Everything about him said, "I am not here to be charming. I am here because I was required to be, and I am counting the minutes until I can leave." Elara understood that feeling so completely that she almost smiled. He saw the almost smile. She knew this because his head tilted, just slightly, the way a person tilts toward a sound they did not expect. And then he moved. Not quickly, not with the eager, bouncing stride of a young man crossing a dance floor toward a pretty girl. He moved the way weather moves, slowly, inevitably, with a kind of gravity that made the crowd part without knowing why. People stepped aside for him. They did not seem to notice they were doing it. He stopped 3 feet from her. The candlelight caught the silver threads woven into his black coat, and for a moment he looked less like a man and more like a piece of the night sky that had wandered indoors. "You are not enjoying yourself," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, with a roughness at its edges that made it sound like it had been used sparingly and only for things that mattered. "Neither are you," she said. Something shifted behind the mask. Not a smile, not yet. Something closer to recognition. As if he had expected her to say something polite and forgettable, and she had refused, and that refusal had made him pay attention. "I was told attendance was not optional," he said. "So was I," she said, "though in my case it was less of an order and more of a dare." "And you accepted?" "I have a terrible habit of accepting dares." This time the corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was the place where a smile would live if he ever allowed one. "That," he said, "is either very brave or very foolish." "In my experience," she said, "those are usually the same thing." He studied her. She could feel the weight of his gaze even through the mask, and it was not the kind of gaze she was used to. Not dismissive, not appraising in the way men sometimes looked at women, calculating what they were worth. This was something else. This was the look of a man trying to read a book whose language he did not quite know, and finding, to his surprise, that he wanted to learn it. "Dance with me," he said. It was not a question, but it was not an order either. It sat somewhere between the two, in a space that left room for her to refuse if she wanted to. She did not want to. The orchestra had shifted into a waltz, something slow and aching, a melody that sounded like it had been composed by someone who understood what it felt like to want something you were not allowed to have. He offered his hand. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, and the warmth of his palm sent a jolt through her that she felt in her chest, her stomach, the backs of her knees. His other hand settled against the curve of her waist, with a precision that was almost careful, as though he understood exactly how significant the touch was and did not want to waste it. They danced, and the world, for a little while, became very small. Just the two of them and the music and the golden candlelight and the slow, deliberate turning of their bodies through space. She was aware of every point of contact between them. His hand on her waist, her hand on his shoulder, their joined fingers. She was aware of the scent of him, something clean and faintly sharp, like cold air and cedar. She was aware that she had never in her life felt so entirely present in a single moment, as though every minute she had lived before this one had been a rough draft, and this was the final version. He did not speak for the duration of the first waltz. Neither did she. The silence between them was not empty. It was full. Full of questions neither of them had asked yet. Full of the strange, terrifying electricity of two people realizing at the same time that something is happening that cannot be undone. When the music paused, he did not release her. His hand remained on her waist, steady and warm, and his thumb moved. Just once, a single, slow stroke against the fabric at her side, and the intimacy of that small gesture nearly undid her. "Another," he said, "because we'll talk. People always talk. It is their least interesting quality." She laughed. It escaped before she could catch it, bright and surprised and real, and his eyes, grey she could see now, a deep, storm-dark grey behind the mask, fixed on her mouth, as though the sound of her laughter was something he intended to remember. They danced again, and again. 3 waltzes became 4. 4 became 5. Between dances they talked, not the careful, polished conversation of society, but something rawer and more honest. The kind of conversation that happens when 2 people are wearing masks and have therefore, paradoxically, decided to stop pretending. He told her he hated London. She told him she had never been. He told her he had read the same book 3 times in the last month because he could not find another one worth starting. She asked which book. He told her. It was her father's favorite. She almost said so, but something stopped her. Some instinct that this detail was too real, too close to the girl beneath the mask, and she was not ready to let the mask fall. Not yet. He told her that his family expected things of him that he was not certain he could deliver. She told him that her family had once expected things of her, too, and that the world had rearranged those expectations without asking permission. He was quiet after that, and the quality of his silence told her he had heard what she was not saying, that something had been lost, that she was carrying a weight she had not chosen, and that he would not push. She asked him why he had come to speak to her, out of everyone in the room. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "Because you were the only person in this room who looked like you were thinking about leaving, and I wanted to give you a reason to stay." The 5th waltz ended. The candles had burned lower. The crowd had thinned at the edges, guests drifting toward the supper room or the card tables, or the dark, quiet corners where conversations became confessions. The orchestra began a slower piece, something in a minor key that sounded like longing given a melody. He leaned closer. She could feel the warmth of his breath against her temple. "Tell me your name," he said. And the spell broke. Not loudly, not with a crash or a shout or a dramatic revelation. It broke the way dawn breaks, slowly, inevitably, with a spreading light that reveals what the darkness had mercifully hidden. Because in that moment, standing in his arms, with his breath warm against her skin and his voice low enough to be a secret, Elara remembered who she was. Not the girl in the blue dress, not the girl who could make a man with storm-grey eyes almost smile. She was the seamstress's daughter. She was the girl with pins in her pockets and chalk dust on her fingers. She was nobody, and he, whoever he was beneath that black mask, was very clearly somebody, and this beautiful, impossible night was a borrowed thing that she had to return before it cost her something she could not afford to pay. "I have to go," she said. His hand tightened on hers, not to trap her, to ask. Why? because the dare only covered one night. She tried to smile. It came out uneven, cracked at the edges, and she saw him notice the crack. Saw him read it correctly as pain rather than playfulness. Then tell me your name, and tomorrow it will not be a dare. It will be a choice. She pulled her hand free. The loss of his warmth was physical, immediate, like stepping from a heated room into snow. Thank you, she said, for the dances, for the conversation, for all of it. That sounds like a goodbye. It is. She turned. She walked. She did not run, because running would have been dramatic, and she was not dramatic. She was practical. She was sensible. She was the kind of girl who understood that borrowed things must be returned. But she walked fast, faster than she should have in borrowed shoes on a marble floor, and she did not look back. She could not look back. Because if she looked back and saw him standing there, watching her leave with those grey eyes, she would stop. She would go back. She would tell him everything, her name, her address, the colour of the door on the shop where she spent her days. And then the real world would come flooding in, and he would see her, the real her, and the girl he had danced with would disappear like smoke. She made it to the entrance hall. She made it down the stone steps into the cool October air. She made it to the lane where the hired cart was waiting to take her back to Thornfield. She climbed in, pulled the blue dress tight around her shoulders, and pressed her forehead against the wooden side of the cart. She did not cry. She was practical. She was sensible. She cried the entire way home. She learned his name 3 days later. She was delivering a finished gown to Haverton House, the largest estate in the county, and the housekeeper, a crisp, efficient woman named Mrs. Calloway, was discussing the masquerade with a footman, while Elara waited in the servants' hall with the dress box balanced on her knees. His Grace was in an odd temper after the ball, Mrs. Calloway said. Asked me if I had seen a young woman in a blue dress leaving the Ashford house. Blue dress? Can you imagine? As if I stand about cataloguing what people wear. His Grace notices very little, as a rule, the footman said. Must have been something remarkable about the lady. Or something remarkable about the evening. 3 years since her Grace passed, and not once has he shown the slightest interest in any woman. Not once. And now he is asking about blue dresses. Elara's fingers went still on the dress box. His Grace, she said, before she could stop herself. Mrs. Calloway glanced at her, as though she had forgotten Elara was there. The Duke of Ashworth, she said. Lord Nathaniel Voss. He owns half the county, girl. Surely you know that. Elara knew. Everyone in Thornfield knew. The Duke of Ashworth was the kind of man whose name carried the weight of a cathedral bell. Enormous, resonant, impossible to ignore. He was 31 years old, unmarried since the death of his young wife 3 years prior, and he governed his vast estate with a precision that bordered on obsession. He attended every public function because duty required it. He spoke to people because courtesy demanded it. He smiled at no one. He danced with no one. He had danced with her 5 times. The realization hit her like cold water poured over her head on a January morning. She had spent an entire evening in the arms of the most powerful man in the county. She had laughed at his dry observations. She had told him, she had told him things. Not her name, thank goodness, not the details of her life, but the shape of her loneliness, the outline of her grief, the texture of what she had lost. She had given him the architecture of who she was without giving him the address, and now he was asking housekeepers about a girl in a blue dress. Fear, cold and immediate, settled in her chest. Not fear of him. She could not make herself fear a man whose thumb had traced a single gentle line against her waist, as if memorizing the feel of her. Fear of what would happen when he found out. When the Duke of Ashworth discovered that the woman he had danced with, the woman who had made him almost smile for the first time in 3 years, was a seamstress's daughter who earned her bread on her knees with a mouthful of pins. The disappointment, the polite withdrawal, the careful, correct, devastating kindness with which a man of his station would explain that he had made a mistake. She could not bear that. She would rather keep the memory whole and beautiful and untouched than watch him dismantle it with an apology. So she made a rule. One rule, simple and absolute. She would never be in the same room as him again. It should have been easy. Their worlds did not overlap. He moved through ballrooms and council chambers and the private drawing rooms of the powerful. She moved through servants' halls and back doors and the narrow, fabric-cluttered aisles of her mother's shop. The chances of encountering the Duke of Ashworth in the ordinary course of her ordinary life were approximately the same as the chances of being struck by lightning while holding a winning lottery ticket during a solar eclipse. Slim. Impossibly slim. Except that Nathaniel Voss, the 6th Duke of Ashworth, was looking for her. He did not announce it. He was not the kind of man who announced things. He simply began to appear. At village fairs, at charity auctions, at church services in parishes he had never previously visited. His carriage was seen in towns where he had no business. His name appeared on guest lists for events he would normally have declined with a single, dismissive line. The county noticed. The county talked. Ashworth is out again, they would say, with the particular mix of excitement and suspicion that the English countryside reserved for any aristocrat who deviated from his established pattern. Looking for something, they say. Or someone. Elara heard the whispers. She understood them immediately, with the sharp, cold clarity of a hunted animal recognizing the sound of hoofbeats. He was looking for the girl in the blue dress. He was looking for her. The first time she nearly encountered him was 6 weeks after the masquerade. She was delivering a dress to a house where a winter dinner party was being held, and as she approached the servants' entrance, she saw a carriage in the drive bearing the Ashworth crest, a silver hawk on a field of black. She stopped. She stood in the shadow of a yew hedge for what felt like an hour, but was probably 4 minutes. Then she turned around and walked home through the dark, the dress box still under her arm, and told her mother the next morning that the customer had not been available and she would try again tomorrow. The second time was 3 months later. She was at the Thornfield Spring Market, buying ribbon for the shop, when she heard a murmur run through the crowd like wind through wheat. She looked up and saw him. He was 50 yards away, standing beside his horse, scanning the market stalls with those grey eyes that she had been trying very hard not to remember. She dropped the ribbon, turned on her heel, and disappeared into the narrow alley between the baker's shop and the saddler's. She pressed her back against the brick wall and listened to her own heartbeat until she was certain he had moved on. After that, she became more careful. She began wearing a cloak whenever she left the shop. Not her own cloak, which was a dark green that her mother said brought out the colour of her eyes, but a servant's cloak, borrowed from a girl who worked in the kitchen of one of the great houses. It was the colour of mud, shapeless, enormous, with a hood that fell forward and obscured her face completely. In this cloak, she was no one. She was a shadow. She was every servant girl who had ever walked along a country road carrying something for someone else. The cloak swallowed her, the way the world had been trying to swallow her since her father died. Completely, impersonally, without interest. She hated it. She wore it every single day. The months passed. Spring turned to summer, turned to autumn, turned to winter, and the cycle began again. Elara stitched hems and measured waists and delivered dresses, and when she heard the name Ashworth, she left whatever room she was in. When she saw his carriage, she changed her route. When invitations came, Bess Ashford remained stubbornly friendly and sent her cards to every local event. Elara declined them all. She built her absence into a fortress, and she lived inside it. And if the fortress was lonely, well, loneliness was familiar. loneliness was safe. Loneliness did not dance with you 5 times and then ask for your name in a voice that made your chest ache. She thought about him. She thought about him constantly, daily, helplessly, the way a person thinks about a dream that was so vivid it left a mark on waking life. She thought about his hand on her waist, about the almost smile, about the way he had said, "I wanted to give you a reason to stay." And she folded each thought carefully, like fabric, and put it away in a place where it could not hurt her. She did not take those thoughts out and examine them. She did not allow herself to wonder what would have happened if she had stayed, if she had told him her name, if she had let the night be more than a borrowed thing. Wondering was dangerous. Wondering was a door, and behind the door was a room she could not afford to enter. 2 years passed. 2 full years. 730 days, each one held carefully in place by a single rule and a mud-coloured cloak. And then Lady Ashford announced her winter ball. Not a masquerade this time, a proper ball, with an orchestra and a 12-course supper and enough candles to light a small city. Every notable family in 3 counties was invited, and because Lady Ashford was both generous and practical, she hired Elara's mother to make 6 of the gowns. This meant fittings. This meant deliveries. This meant that Elara, who had not set foot inside Ashford House since the night that had ruined her peace, was required to be there 3 times in the week before the ball, pins in hand, kneeling at the feet of the Ashford daughters while they discussed what they would wear and who they hoped would ask them to dance. "Ashworth will be there, of course," Bess said during the final fitting, standing on a low stool while Elara adjusted the fall of her ivory skirt. "He always comes to Mamma's balls. He never dances, though. Not since that masquerade 2 years ago. Do you remember? He danced 5 times with a girl no one could identify, and then she disappeared, like a ghost, and he has been perfectly dreadful ever since." Elara's hands did not tremble. She would not allow them to tremble. She focused on the hem, on the even line of stitches, on the precise distance between the fabric and the floor. "I would not know," she said. "I was not there." "Oh, you should have been. It was terribly romantic. Tragic, really. He has been looking for her, you know, quietly. He thinks no one notices, but everyone notices. He asks the most peculiar questions. Have you seen a young woman, early 20s, dark hair, who speaks as though she has read every book in the library and is slightly annoyed that she enjoyed them all? Can you imagine? That is his description. Not her eye color or her height or the shape of her face. The way she speaks. He remembers the way she speaks. The pin in Elara's hand slipped. A tiny bead of blood appeared on her fingertip. She pressed it against the inside of her wrist and kept working. "He will not find her," Bess said, with the cheerful fatalism of a girl who found other people's heartbreak entertaining. "She is probably married by now, or moved away, or dead, though that would be too sad even for this story. Do you think she knows he is looking?" "I could not say," Elara said. "I think she knows," Bess said. "I think she is out there somewhere, thinking about him the same way he is thinking about her, and they are both too stubborn or too frightened to do anything about it. That is the trouble with people, is it not? They would rather be safe and miserable than brave and happy." Elara finished the hem. She gathered her pins, her chalk, her measuring tape. She said the correct things. The dress looked beautiful. The ball would be wonderful. She hoped Bess would enjoy herself. And then she walked out through the servants' entrance, and she stood in the cold November air with her hands pressed to her face, and she breathed, just breathed, until the shaking stopped. He remembered the way she spoke. Not her face, not her body, the way she spoke. She went home. She ate supper with her mother. She went to bed. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and thought about a man whose thumb had traced a single line against her waist 2 years ago in a room full of golden light, and who was still still trying to find her. In the morning, she got up. She put on the mud-colored cloak. She went to work. The rule held. The fortress held. She was safe. The night of the ball arrived with the kind of bitter, bone-deep cold that turned breath to mist and made the stars look sharp enough to cut. Elara was not attending the ball. She had no invitation, no dress, and no intention of repeating the mistake that had cost her 2 years of peace. She was, however, required to deliver the final gown, a rose-pink silk that Lady Ashford herself would wear, and her mother, whose hands had been aching with the cold all week, asked Elara to bring it to the house and help Lady Ashford into it, since the fastenings at the back were complicated and required someone who understood the construction. "Wear the good cloak," her mother said. "You will be going in through the front tonight. Lady Ashford requested it." "I will wear the brown one," Elara said. Her mother looked at her, a long, quiet look that held more understanding than Elara was prepared for. "You have been wearing that dreadful thing for 2 years," she said. "It makes you look like a sack of potatoes." "That is rather the point." "Is it?" Her mother's voice was gentle, and the gentleness was worse than any question. "Elara, whatever you are hiding from, it will not wait forever." "I am not hiding." "You are hiding. You have been hiding since that masquerade, and I have not pressed you because I hoped you would find your own way out. But you have not. You have only dug deeper in." Elara pulled the brown cloak over her shoulders and lifted the hood. Her mother's face disappeared behind the rough wool. "I will be back before 9, she said. She walked to Ashford House through the dark, the dress box held against her chest like a shield. The road was frozen, the ruts hard enough to stumble over. She could see the house from half a mile away, every window blazing, a golden ship anchored in a sea of black fields. Carriages lined the drive, lanterns flickered along the path. The sound of the orchestra drifted toward her on the still air, faint and sweet, and she recognized the melody instantly. A waltz. The same waltz. The opening bars of the piece they had danced to first 2 years ago, when his hand had closed around hers, and the world had become very small. She stopped in the road. She stood there, the cold pressing against her skin, the music pulling at something in her chest that she had been trying very hard to keep locked away. "Go," she told herself. "Deliver the dress. Help Lady Ashford. Leave. Do not linger. Do not listen. Do not remember." She went. The servants' entrance was chaos. Extra staff had been hired for the evening, and the kitchen corridor was a river of bodies carrying trays of food and bottles of wine and armfuls of fresh candles. Elara moved through them with the ease of long practice, invisible in her brown cloak, just another servant going about her business. She found the back staircase and climbed to the second floor, where Lady Ashford's dressing room overlooked the ballroom. Lady Ashford was waiting, wrapped in a silk robe, her hair already pinned in an elaborate arrangement that sparkled with tiny crystals. She was a tall woman in her 50s, handsome rather than beautiful, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She greeted Elara with brisk warmth, took the dress box, and disappeared behind a screen to change. "The fastenings," Lady Ashford called. "Come and do the fastenings." Elara stepped behind the screen and began the delicate work of closing the dozens of tiny silk-covered buttons that ran up the back of the gown. Her fingers moved automatically. Button, loop, close. Button, loop, close. Through the dressing room wall, she could hear the ballroom, the orchestra, the hum of conversation, the occasional bright crack of laughter. "You made this beautifully," Lady Ashford said. "Your mother trained you well." "Thank you, my lady." "You should be down there, you know, at the ball. A girl your age, with your face, hiding in servants' corridors. It is a waste." "I am not hiding, my lady. I am working." Lady Ashford turned her head just enough to look at Elara over her shoulder. Her eyes were uncomfortably perceptive. My daughter tells me Ashworth is still searching for his mystery girl, the one from my masquerade. 2 years, and the man has not given up. I have known Nathaniel Voss since he was a boy, and I can tell you this, he does not do things by halves. When he commits to a course of action, he follows it to the end. It is his finest quality, and his most dangerous one. Elara's fingers continued their work. Button, loop, close. That is very romantic, my lady. It is very stubborn, is what it is. But stubbornness and romance are closer cousins than most people realize. Lady Ashford paused. The last button, dear. Elara closed the final button. Lady Ashford examined herself in the mirror, turned once, nodded in satisfaction, and then fixed Elara with a look that pinned her like a butterfly to a board. You may leave through the servants' corridor if you wish, she said. But if you happen to pass through the gallery on the 2nd floor, you will find that it overlooks the ballroom. The view is quite something. Just a suggestion. Lady Ashford swept out of the room and left Elara standing alone. She should leave. She knew she should leave. The dress was delivered, the buttons were done, her work was finished. The front door was downstairs. The servants' corridor would take her past the kitchen and out into the cold, safe night. She could be home in 30 minutes. She could be in bed in 45. She could pretend that the waltz she had heard from the road had not carved a hole in her chest. She should leave. She went to the gallery. It was a narrow, wood-panelled corridor that ran along the upper level of the ballroom, separated from the dancers below by a carved balustrade. In the old days, it had been used by servants and musicians. Tonight it was empty. All the activity was on the floor below, where 300 guests moved through the golden light like fish in a glittering pond. Elara stood at the balustrade, her brown cloak still pulled tight around her, her hood up, and she looked down. She found him in 7 seconds. Not because he was the most richly dressed, or the tallest, or the most surrounded. She found him because her body recognized him before her mind did. Some shift in her breathing, some tightening in her chest, some magnetic pull that bypassed thought entirely and went straight to the place where memory lived. He was standing near the east wall, a glass of wine in his hand, wearing a dark coat that fit him as though it had been cut from his own shadow. His hair was darker than she remembered, or perhaps the candlelight 2 years ago had been kinder. His face was the same, all sharp angles and restrained intensity, the jaw, the mouth. But there were lines around his eyes that had not been there before, and they made him look not older, but more tired, as though the 2 years had cost him something he had not expected to pay. He was not dancing. He was not speaking. He was scanning the room with the slow, methodical attention of a man who had been scanning rooms for 2 years and had almost, but not quite, given up hope of finding what he was looking for. He was looking for her. Elara gripped the balustrade. The wood was cool under her fingers, smooth and old, and she held on as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. She should not be here. She was breaking her own rule. She was in the same room as him, above it technically, but the room still held both of them, and the air they breathed was the same air, and if he looked up he would see a servant. A brown cloak, a hidden face, a figure so unremarkable that his gaze would pass over it the way light passes over a stone. He would not see her. He could not see her. The cloak was doing its job. She should leave. She should leave right now. She stayed. She stayed because the orchestra was playing, and he was standing in the light, and this was the closest she had been to him in 2 years. And the closeness, even from a gallery, even through a disguise, even with an entire ballroom between them, was enough to make the locked place in her chest crack open, just enough to let something warm and painful escape. She stayed because Bess Ashford's words were circling in her head like birds. He remembers the way she speaks. and she wanted, just for one moment, to be in the same room with a man who remembered the way she spoke. She did not know how long she stood there. Long enough for the candles to burn lower, long enough for 3 dances to end and a 4th to begin, long enough for her feet to go cold on the wooden floor and her fingers to ache from gripping the balustrade. She was so absorbed in watching him, the way he held his glass, the way he inclined his head when someone spoke to him, the way his eyes moved ceaselessly, always searching, never finding, that she did not hear the footsteps behind her. "You there!" She spun. A footman in Ashford livery stood at the end of the gallery, holding a tray of empty glasses. He looked irritated. "The servants' corridor is through the back," he said. "This gallery is not in use tonight. You should not be here." "I apologize," Elara said. "I was just leaving." She moved toward the far end of the gallery, away from the footman, away from the balustrade, away from the view of the ballroom. The corridor turned sharply and opened onto a narrow staircase that led down to the ground floor. She took the stairs quickly, one hand holding the cloak closed at her throat, the other trailing along the wall for balance. At the bottom, a door opened into a short hallway she did not recognize. She turned left, then right, then left again, and found herself not in the servants' corridor, but in a wide, carpeted passage that smelled of beeswax and roses. The walls were lined with portraits. Candles burned in silver sconces. This was not the back of the house. This was the front. She had taken a wrong turn. The passage ended at a set of double doors, and beyond the doors she could hear the ballroom. Louder now, closer, the music and the laughter and the rustle of 100 silk gowns. She needed to turn around. She needed to retrace her steps, find the servants' corridor, and leave. She turned. The double doors opened behind her. A wave of warm air, perfumed and golden, rolled out into the passage, and with it came voices and light, and the unmistakable sound of people moving through a doorway. A group of guests was leaving the ballroom, stepping into the passage for air or conversation or escape. Elara pressed herself against the wall, pulling the hood of her cloak lower, making herself small, making herself invisible. 3 women passed her, laughing, their gowns brushing against her cloak. A man followed, arguing amiably with another about a horse race. A couple walked by, arm in arm, whispering. None of them looked at her. She was a servant in a brown cloak, pressed against a wall, and she was as visible to them as the wallpaper. And then he walked through the doors. She knew it was him before she saw his face. She knew it the way she had known it 2 years ago. Something in her body that recognized him before her mind could catch up. A shift in the quality of the air, a change in the rhythm of her own heart. He walked past her, 3 feet away, close enough that she could have reached out and touched the sleeve of his dark coat, close enough that she could smell the clean, sharp scent of him, cold air and cedar, the same, exactly the same, as the night he had held her, and the world had become very small. He walked past her. He did not look at her. She was invisible. The cloak was working. She was safe. And then he stopped. He stopped so suddenly that the man walking behind him nearly collided with his back. He stopped the way a person stops when they hear a sound that should not be there. A voice from a dream, a melody from a memory that had been locked away and was suddenly, impossibly, playing in the wrong room. He stood very still, his back to her, his head slightly tilted, and the stillness was so complete that the air around him seemed to hold its breath. He turned, slowly, not toward her face, toward her shoulder, her arm, the edge of her cloak. His eyes moved down the shapeless brown fabric with an intensity that made no sense, because there was nothing to see, nothing that could possibly have caught the attention of a man who had been searching for a specific woman for 2 years. She was wearing a servant's cloak. She was nobody. But his eyes stopped at her hand, her left hand, which was gripping the edge of the cloak at her throat. Her fingers were visible. Just her fingers, slim and pale, with a faint scar across the knuckle of her index finger, where a pair of scissors had slipped 3 years ago, and on her smallest finger, a ring. A thin band of braided silver that her father had made for her when she was 12, twisting the metal himself in his study while she read aloud to him from a book of Greek myths. She wore it always. She had worn it at the masquerade. She had worn it when his hand held hers through 5 waltzes. She had worn it when she pulled away and walked out of his life. He looked at the ring. He looked at it the way a drowning man looks at the surface of the water, with desperate, disbelieving, furious hope. Then he looked at her face. The hood cast a shadow, but they were standing beneath a candle sconce, and the warm light fell at an angle that caught the lower half of her face, her mouth, her jaw, the line of her chin. He stared. She watched his expression shift like weather, confusion, recognition, shock, and then something so raw and unguarded that she felt it in her own chest, a mirror pain, a matching wound. "It's you," he said. 2 words. 2 small, simple words, spoken in a voice that was barely above a whisper, and yet carried the weight of 730 days of searching, of rooms scanned and crowds examined and questions asked and hopes raised and dashed and raised again. 2 words that were not a question. He was not asking. He knew. Elara did what she had trained herself to do. She ran. She pushed past him, or tried to. He was solid and unyielding, and she was shaking so badly that her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. And she made it 2 steps before his hand caught her wrist. Not hard, not rough. His fingers closed around her wrist with the same careful precision with which he had placed his hand on her waist 2 years ago, as though he understood that this moment was fragile, and one wrong movement would shatter it. "Don't," he said. "Let me go." "No. You do not understand. I have been looking for you for 2 years," he said, and his voice cracked on the word years, a fissure running through something that had been holding itself together for too long. 2 years. I have gone to every ball, every dinner, every village market in 3 counties. I have described you to every person I could think of. I have lost sleep and dignity and the patience of every person who knows me. And you were here. The entire time, you were here. Please let me go." Her voice was steady, but her wrist was shaking in his grip, and she knew he could feel it, and she knew he would read it correctly. Not as fear of him, but as fear of this, of the thing that was happening, of the wall coming down. "Who are you?" he asked. She could not answer. If she answered, it was over. The fortress, the cloak, the careful 2-year architecture of absence, all of it would collapse, and she would be standing in front of the Duke of Ashworth in a borrowed servant's cloak with chalk dust under her fingernails. And he would see her, the real her. And she was not ready. She would never be ready. "I am no one," she said. "I am a servant. You are mistaken. You are lying." He said it without anger. He said it the way you state a fact so obvious that arguing would be absurd. "You are the worst liar I have ever met, and I grew up surrounded by politicians." A sound escaped her. Not a laugh, not quite, but something close enough that they both recognized it, and the recognition changed the air between them. Because she had made that same sound 2 years ago, in the middle of a waltz, when he had said something dry and unexpected, and her laughter had surprised them both. His grip on her wrist gentled. His thumb moved. Once, a single slow stroke against the inside of her wrist, against the pulse that was hammering so hard she was certain he could feel it. And the intimacy of that gesture, identical to the one that had nearly undone her on the dance floor 2 years ago, nearly undid her now. "I know it is you," he said. Do not insult me by pretending otherwise. You can refuse to tell me your name. You can leave if you truly want to leave. But do not tell me you are no one. I have spent 2 years learning exactly how much of a someone you are." She looked up. The hood fell back. The candlelight found her face, all of it this time, and she watched him take it in. Not the mask, not the midnight blue dress, not the borrowed beauty of a single enchanted evening. Just her. Elara Wynne, 22 years old, brown hair pinned under a cotton cap, tired eyes. A face that was prettier dark in good light, but nothing extraordinary, nothing that would stop a duke in a corridor, nothing that would sustain a 2-year search. He looked at her as though she were the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen. "There you are," he said, quietly, almost to himself, as if he had been saying those words in his head for 2 years, and they had finally found their way out. She broke. Not dramatically. There was no sobbing, no collapsing, no falling into his arms. She broke the way a dam breaks, silently, from the inside, the pressure of 2 years of wanting and hiding and pretending she did not want and did not need to be found, finally exceeding what the walls could hold. Her eyes filled. One tear fell, just one, tracing a line down her cheek that the candlelight turned tine. He released her wrist. He raised his hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away, giving her time to run, and brushed the tear from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was so gentle that it barely qualified as touch at all. It was more like a promise. "I see you. I am not going anywhere." "My name is Elara," she said. Her voice was thin, stripped bare, with no protection left. "Elara Wynne. I'm a seamstress. I live above a dress shop in Thornfield. I have chalk dust on my hands and pins in my pockets, and I am nobody. And you have wasted 2 years." "Elara," he repeated. Just her name, but the way he said it, slowly, carefully, as though he were learning the shape of it, as though it was something precious he had been given and intended to keep, made her chest ache in a way that was no longer entirely painful. "You do not understand," she said. "I am not the girl from the masquerade. That girl was wearing a beautiful dress and a mask, and she existed for 1 night only. I am this." She gestured at herself. The brown cloak, the cotton cap, the work-roughened hands. "This is what is real. That night was a dream, and you have been chasing a dream. And I am sorry. I am so sorry." "You are wrong," he said. He did not say it the way people say, "You are wrong," when they are being kind. He said it the way people say, "You are wrong," when they are stating a fact that they have verified 1,000 times and are now, frankly, tired of having to prove. The dress was beautiful. The mask was lovely. I do not remember either one. I remember the way you laughed when I said something that was barely funny. I remember the way you said, "In my experience, those are usually the same thing," as though you had earned the right to say it, and you had. I remember the way you talked about books, as though they were friends who had disappointed you. I remember the way your hand felt in mine. I remember the way you walked away. And I remember that it felt like losing something I had only just realized I needed. None of those things were the dress. None of those things were the mask. Those things were you. And you are standing in front of me now, and I would very much like it if you stopped trying to convince me that you are not worth finding. She stared at him. The corridor was empty now. The other guests had moved on, drawn back into the ballroom or deeper into the house, leaving the two of them alone in the candle-lit passage with its portraits and its roses and its silence. Somewhere beyond the walls, the orchestra played. Somewhere beyond the walls, 300 people danced and laughed and performed the rituals of a world that had never had room for a girl like Elara and a man like Nathaniel in the same sentence. "You are a duke," she said. Yes. I make dresses for a living. Yes. The entire county will talk. The entire county already talks. They've been talking for 2 years. They will be delighted to finally have something accurate to talk about. This is not a joke. No, he said, and the almost humor faded from his voice, replaced by something deeper, something that lived beneath the dry wit and the careful control. It is not a joke. Nothing about this has been a joke to me. I have spent 2 years walking into rooms and looking for a woman whose name I did not know, whose face I barely saw, who gave me one evening and then vanished as though she had never existed. I have been told by every person who cares about me that I am obsessive, irrational, and possibly losing my mind. My sister thinks I invented you. My steward thinks I am in the grip of some romantic delusion brought on by grief and loneliness. And perhaps they are right. Perhaps I am all of those things. But I know what I felt that night. I know what I have felt every day since. And I know that you felt it too, because you have spent 2 years hiding from it, and you would not need to hide from something that did not matter. She had no defense against that. She had no defense because it was true. Every word, every precise, devastating observation was true. And he had delivered the truth not as a weapon, but as an offering, laid bare, vulnerable, given to her to do with as she chose. He was not commanding her to stay. He was not using his title or his power or the vast, obvious inequality between them to compel her. He was standing in a corridor, having stripped away every protection he had, the coldness, the control, the careful silence that she now understood was not indifference, but armor. And he was saying, "This is who I am without the walls. This is what you did to me. Please, do not walk away again." "I was afraid," she said. The words came out small and honest and entirely unprotected. "I was afraid that if you found out who I really was, you would be disappointed. That the girl you danced with would disappear, and you would be left with just me. Just you," he repeated, as though just you is not exactly, precisely, the only thing I have been looking for. "You do not know me. I know that you are brave enough to walk into a masquerade on a dare, and honest enough to tell a stranger that bravery and foolishness are the same thing. I know that you lost someone important, and that the loss changed the shape of your life. I know that you laugh when you do not expect to, and that the sound of it stays with a person long after the music stops. I know that you have been wearing a servant's cloak for 2 years to avoid a man you danced with for one evening, which tells me that the evening mattered to you as much as it mattered to me. I know enough, and I would like the chance to learn the rest." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. Full of the same electricity that had filled the silence between them on the dance floor 2 years ago. The charged, trembling space between two people who are standing at the edge of something enormous and deciding whether to step forward or back. Elara thought about the fortress she had built, the brown cloak, the careful roots, the 2 years of absence that she had constructed, brick by brick, to protect herself from exactly this moment. She thought about how well the fortress had worked, how completely she had disappeared, how thoroughly she had erased herself from his world and his from hers. She thought about the cost, the loneliness, the nights she had lain awake thinking about the way his thumb had moved against her waist, the mornings she had pulled on the brown cloak and felt something in her chest go quiet and small. She thought about her father, who had twisted a silver ring for her in his study while she read aloud from a book of Greek myths, and who had told her once that the bravest thing a person could do was not to fight or to endure, but to allow themselves to be truly known by another human being. She looked at Nathaniel Voss, the 6th Duke of Ashworth, who was standing in front of her, with his walls down and his hands empty, and his grey eyes full of something that looked terrifyingly like hope. "I do not know how to do this," she said. "I do not know how to be in your world. I do not have the right clothes, or the right manners, or the right name. I will embarrass you. I will say the wrong thing at dinner and use the wrong fork, and everyone will know that I do not belong." "You used the wrong fork at the masquerade supper," he said. "You picked up the dessert fork for the fish course. I saw you realize your mistake halfway through and decide to commit to it rather than switch. It was the most charming thing I had ever seen." She stared at him. "You noticed that?" "I noticed everything. I have been trying not to notice for 2 years, and I have failed spectacularly at it. I notice things about you that I did not know it was possible to notice about another person. The way your left eyebrow rises when you are about to say something clever, the scar on your finger, the ring you wear on your smallest finger, which I am guessing was given to you by someone you loved very much, because you touch it when you are nervous, the way a person touches a talisman." "My father made it," she whispered. "He made it for me when I was 12. "He had good taste in rings," Nathaniel said. "And in daughters." She almost smiled. It was the same almost smile she had given him across the ballroom 2 years ago. The one that had made him tilt his head. The one that had made him cross the room. The one that had started everything. And he saw it. He saw it and recognized it, and the recognition moved across his face like sunrise. "Dance with me," he said. "There is no music." He tilted his head toward the ballroom wall. Faintly, muffled by stone and plaster but still audible, the orchestra was playing. A waltz, slow, aching, in a minor key. The same waltz. Whether by coincidence or by the particular cruelty of the universe, the same waltz that had played the first time he held her. "There is always music," he said. "You just have to be willing to hear it." He offered his hand, the same way he had offered it 2 years ago, palm up, fingers open, steady and unhurried, leaving room for her to refuse. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She looked at the brown cloak she was wearing, the disguise that had kept her invisible for 2 years, the fabric prison she had chosen over the terrifying possibility of being seen. She unfastened the cloak. She let it fall. It pooled around her feet like a shadow she had finally decided to step out of, and she was standing in her work dress, plain grey wool, practical and unadorned, with chalk marks on the sleeve, and a needle still stuck in the collar where she had forgotten to remove it. And she was herself, entirely, completely, unprotectedly herself. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm, and the warmth shot through her the same way it had the first time. Chest, stomach, the backs of her knees. His other hand settled on her waist, and his thumb moved. That small, specific, devastating gesture. And she placed her hand on his shoulder and felt the solid warmth of him beneath the dark fabric of his coat. They danced. In a corridor, in the muffled echo of an orchestra playing beyond a wall, with no one watching, and no masks to hide behind, and no borrowed dresses to make her into someone she was not. They danced slowly, barely moving, more of a swaying than a waltz, and the world became very small again. Just the two of them, and the faint music and the candlelight, and the warmth of his hand on her waist, and hers on his shoulder, and their joined fingers, and the impossible, undeniable fact that they had found each other. "I need to tell you something," he said after a while. His voice was close to her ear, low and rough-edged, and she could feel the vibration of it in her chest. "Tell me, I was not looking for you because of the masquerade. I was not looking for you because of one night, or 5 dances, or a conversation that I replayed in my head 1,000 times until I had every word memorized. I was looking for you because my wife died 3 years before that night, and I'd spent those 3 years believing that the part of me that could feel anything for another person had died with her. And then you laughed, and I realized it had not died. It had just been waiting." She stopped moving. She looked up at him. His face was very close, and in the candlelight she could see the lines around his eyes and the silver flecks in his grey irises, and the faint scar above his left eyebrow that she had not noticed before, and the extraordinary vulnerability of a man who had just said the truest thing he knew how to say, and was waiting to see if it would be received or returned. "I am scared," she said. "So am I." "You do not look scared." "I have had a great deal of practice at not looking like things." She almost laughed. Not quite. The sound was caught somewhere between her chest and her throat, held there by the sheer weight of the moment. "What if this is a mistake?" she asked. "Then it will be the best mistake either of us has ever made." "That is not reassuring." "I was not trying to be reassuring. I was trying to be honest." She looked at him. Really looked. The way she had looked at him across the ballroom 2 years ago, when she had seen a man who was counting the minutes until he could leave, and had understood, instantly and completely, the particular shape of his loneliness, because it matched her own. "I am a seamstress," she said. "I live above a shop. I have calluses on my fingers from needles. My mother makes her living on her knees, pinning hems for women who do not bother to learn her name. This is who I am, and if you want to dance with me, you are dancing with all of it." "I know," he said. "That is why I asked." She let out a breath she had been holding for 2 years. It left her body in a long, slow exhale that felt like something releasing, something unlocking, a door opening onto a room she had been standing outside of for so long that she had forgotten what warmth felt like. And then she stepped closer. Not because he pulled her, not because the music moved her, because she chose to. Because the distance between them had been measured and meaningful for 2 years, and she was ready to close it. She laid her head against his shoulder. His chin rested on the top of her head. His hand tightened on her waist, not possessively, not desperately, but with the steady, quiet certainty of a man who had found the thing he had been looking for and was not going to let it go. They stood there, swaying gently, barely dancing, in a corridor that smelled of beeswax and roses, while the orchestra played beyond the wall, and the brown cloak lay forgotten on the floor, like the skin of a creature she had outgrown. The days that followed were not easy. She had not expected them to be. The fairy tale, if that was what this was, did not end with the waltz in the corridor. It began there, and the beginning was harder than the hiding had been. Nathaniel called on her the next day. He arrived at the dress shop in Thornfield in his carriage, with his crest on the door and his driver in livery, and the entire street came to its windows to watch the Duke of Ashworth climb down from his carriage and walk through the front door of a seamstress's shop as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The bell above the door rang. Elara's mother looked up from her workbench. Nathaniel removed his hat. "Mrs. Wynne," he said, "my name is Nathaniel Voss. I would like your permission to call on your daughter." Elara, who was standing behind the counter with a bolt of fabric in her arms, dropped it. The bolt unrolled across the floor in a river of dark blue silk, and she watched it go with the dazed expression of a woman whose carefully constructed world was unraveling in a similar fashion. Her mother looked at the Duke. She looked at the silk on the floor. She looked at Elara. She looked back at the Duke. "You are the one she has been hiding from," she said. It was not a question. Yes, Nathaniel said. 2 years she has worn that awful brown cloak. 2 years she has jumped to the sound of carriage wheels. I have been very patient. I appreciate your patience, Mrs. Wynne. I have not said you may have it yet. Her mother put down her needle. She stood. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with Elara's dark hair and a spine made of something considerably sterner than bone. She looked up at the Duke of Ashworth, who towered over her by more than a foot, and she said, "My daughter is not a prize to be won. She is not a mystery to be solved. She is a person, and she has a life. And if you are here because you enjoyed the thrill of the chase and intend to lose interest now that the chase is over, I will ask you to leave and never come back." "Mother," Elara said, mortified. "Hush." Her mother did not look away from Nathaniel. "Well?" Nathaniel met her gaze. He did not flinch. He did not perform the careful, condescending charm that powerful men often deployed when speaking to women they considered beneath them. He stood in the narrow aisle of the shop, surrounded by bolts of fabric and spools of thread, and the particular, intimate chaos of other people's work, and he said, "Mrs. Wynne, I have spent 2 years looking for your daughter, not because the chase was thrilling, because the absence of her was unbearable. I am not here to play a game. I am here because she is the only person I have met in 5 years who made me feel as though the world might contain something worth paying attention to. And I am asking your permission because she respects you, which means your opinion matters more than mine." Elara's mother looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at Elara. Then she picked up her needle, sat back down at her workbench, and said, "You may call on her, but you will use the front door, you will not keep her out past dark, and you will roll up that silk before it gets dirty." The courtship, if it could be called a courtship, and the county debated this point with enthusiasm that bordered on obsession, proceeded in a manner that no one expected. Nathaniel did not shower Elara with gifts. He did not install her in a fine house, or dress her in gowns, or parade her through society on his arm. He came to the shop. He sat in the chair by the window, a small, uncomfortable chair intended for customers waiting for fittings, and he talked to her while she worked. He brought books, because she had told him that night at the masquerade that she missed reading. And the books he chose were not the safe, pretty novels that men sometimes gave to women they considered delicate. They were books of philosophy, of natural science, of history and poetry and mathematics. They were books he had read himself, and in the margins of some of them she found his handwritten notes, small, precise observations in a hand that slanted slightly to the left, as though even his penmanship was trying to hold something back. She read the books. She argued with his margin notes. She wrote her own in the spaces he had left, and when she returned the books to him, he read her notes with the focused intensity of a man decoding a message that mattered. They argued about Aristotle over tea in the back room of the shop. They debated the merits of Gothic architecture, while she hemmed a dress for the vicar's wife. They disagreed about Shakespeare. She preferred the comedies, he preferred the tragedies, and neither of them was willing to yield, with a passion that left them both breathless and slightly flushed, and avoiding each other's eyes. The county watched. The county whispered. Some of the whispers were kind. "A love story," they said. "How romantic. How unusual." Most of the whispers were not. "A seamstress," they said. "Has he lost his mind? She must have tricked him. She must be very clever. She must be very beautiful. She is neither. She is ordinary. That is what is so baffling." The whispers reached Elara, because whispers always do. They settled on her skin like frost, cold and persistent, and on the worst days they made her pull the brown cloak out of the cupboard where she had stored it and hold it against her chest, feeling the rough, familiar fabric, remembering how safe it had been to be invisible. Nathaniel noticed. He noticed because he noticed everything, and because the quality of her silence changed on the days when the whispers were loudest. She became careful, measured. She laughed less easily. She held herself with the particular rigidity of a person who was bracing for impact. "Tell me," he said, one afternoon in December. They were sitting in the back room of the shop. She was mending a tear in a silk bodice. He was reading, or pretending to read. His eyes had been on the same page for 10 minutes. "Tell you what? Whatever it is that has made you put your armor back on." She looked up. He was watching her with those grey eyes, and the directness of his gaze was both comforting and terrible, because he saw things she had not given him permission to see. "I heard what they are saying," she said, "about us." "What are they saying?" "That I am ordinary, that you have lost your mind, that I must have tricked you." "Ah." He closed the book. He set it down. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, bringing his face close to hers. "And which of those concerns you most?" "The first one." He blinked. "That you are ordinary." "That I am ordinary, and you will eventually realize it. That the masquerade created an illusion, and the illusion is wearing off. And one morning you will look at me across this room and see what everyone else sees. A girl in a grey dress with chalk on her sleeves. And you will wonder what you were thinking." He was quiet for a moment. Not the cold, controlled silence she had once mistaken for indifference. A thoughtful silence, as though he was choosing his words with the same precision he brought to everything. "When my wife died," he said, "I stopped sleeping. Not for a few nights, for months. I would lie in the dark and listen to the house settle and count the hours until morning. And during those months, I learned something about the dark that I had not known before. In the dark, everything looks the same. Every shadow is identical. Every silence is the same silence. The world becomes flat and featureless, and you forget that color exists. And then, one night, one specific, unremarkable night, I looked out the window and saw the moon. Just the moon. Ordinary. Commonplace. The same moon that has been in the sky since the beginning of time. And I stood at that window, and I looked at the moon, and I thought, that is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Not because it was extraordinary, because I had been in the dark so long that I had forgotten what light looked like. You are not ordinary, Elara. But even if you were the most ordinary woman in the world, you would still be the light that I had forgotten existed. And I do not care what anyone else sees when they look at you. I know what I see." She put down the silk bodice. She put down the needle. She looked at him, this man who had been built for silence and control, and who was, piece by piece, dismantling himself in front of her, because she needed to see what was inside. "That is the most you have ever said to me at one time," she said. "It was overdue. You compared me to the moon. You are not going to let me forget that, are you?" "Never." And then she laughed, the bright, surprised, unguarded laugh that had started everything. And he watched her laugh the way he always did, as though the sound of it was a thing he wanted to hold in his hands and keep safe. Spring came. With it came a change that Elara had not anticipated, not in him, but in herself. The fortress she had built, the careful architecture of invisibility and self-protection, was dissolving. Not because Nathaniel was tearing it down, because she was choosing, day by day, to leave the door open a little wider. She was choosing to be seen. She went to dinner at Haverton House. She wore a dress she had made herself, not the midnight blue gown from the masquerade, which she could not bear to wear again, but a new one, deep green, simple and well made, with no embellishments beyond a silver thread at the cuffs that caught the light when she moved. She sat at a table set with more forks than she had ever seen in one place, and she used the correct one for every course. And when she caught Nathaniel watching her from the other end of the table, with an expression of barely suppressed amusement, she deliberately picked up the wrong fork, held it up so he could see, and switched it with exaggerated care. He pressed his napkin to his mouth. His shoulders shook. It was the closest she had ever seen him come to actual laughter. His sister, Lady Catherine, who lived in London and had come to see for herself whether her brother had, in fact, lost his mind, studied Elara with the sharp, assessing eyes of a woman who had spent her life in high society and could spot a pretender at 50 paces. "You are not what I expected," Catherine said over tea the next morning. "I rarely am," Elara said. "He told me you argue with him about Shakespeare. He is wrong about the tragedies. He is wrong about most things, but he is very rarely wrong about people." Catherine set down her teacup. "He has been different since he found you. Not happier, not exactly. More present, as though he has rejoined the world after a long absence. I had given up hoping for that." "I did not do anything," Elara said. "I hid from him for 2 years. Yes, and he found you anyway. That tells you something about both of you, does it not?" It did. It told her that she was a woman who had been so afraid of being seen that she had turned herself into a shadow, and that he was a man who had been so lost in his own darkness that he had spent 2 years searching for the one light he recognized. They had found each other, not in spite of their wounds, but because of them. Because his grief and her fear spoke the same language, and when they stood together, the silence between them was not empty, but full of everything they had survived. The cost, when it came, was real. The county did not welcome the Duke's choice with open arms. Invitations that had once arrived by the dozen slowed to a trickle. Old friends developed sudden schedule conflicts. A society matron who had known Nathaniel since he was a child told him to his face that he was making a spectacle of himself and that his late wife would have been ashamed. Nathaniel listened to this assessment with the particular stillness that Elara now recognized as controlled fury. And then he said, "My late wife would have liked Elara very much." They share a talent for being underestimated. He did not speak to the matron again. There were harder things. A letter from a distant cousin reminding Nathaniel that the title required an appropriate match and that appropriate had a specific meaning that did not include seamstresses. A conversation with his steward, who laid out in careful, reasonable terms the financial and social implications of marrying beneath his station. Nathaniel listened to the steward as he had listened to the matron, with attention and courtesy and an absolute refusal to be moved. "The cost is real," he told Elara that evening, because he had never lied to her, and he was not going to start now. "I will lose some friendships. Some doors will close. Some people who once respected me will decide I have become foolish." "And does that matter to you?" He looked at her. "Would you like the polite answer or the honest one?" "The honest one. Always the honest one." "It stings, but not enough to change my mind. Not a fraction of enough." She reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time she had initiated contact between them. Every previous touch had been his, offered carefully, accepted carefully, as though they were both learning a new language, one word at a time. Her fingers laced through his, and she felt his hand tighten around hers, and the tightening said everything that he had not. "I am sorry," she said, "for hiding, for 2 years of hiding. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was also punishing you for something you had never done. I assumed you would be disappointed, and I never gave you the chance to prove me wrong." "You were afraid." "I was a coward." "You were afraid," he repeated with emphasis. "There is a difference. A coward does not come to dinner at a duke's house in a dress she made herself and deliberately use the wrong fork to make him laugh. A coward does not argue about Shakespeare with a man twice her social standing. A coward does not unfasten a cloak and let it fall and stand in her work dress in front of a man she has been running from for 2 years and say, "This is who I am." You were never a coward, Elara. You were just not ready. And now? Now you are here, and that is enough. He asked her to marry him on a Tuesday. Not at a ball, not in a garden, not in any of the grand, picturesque settings that the county would later insist must have been the location. He asked her in the back room of her mother's shop on a cold March afternoon while she was hemming a petticoat and he was sitting in the uncomfortable chair by the window, pretending to read. "Elara," he said. "Nathaniel." "Will you marry me?" She looked up from the petticoat. He was not kneeling. He was not holding a ring. He was sitting in the chair, the book open in his lap, his grey eyes fixed on her with the same steady, unhurried intensity with which he did everything. "You are asking me to marry you while I am holding a petticoat," she said. "Yes." "You did not plan this." "I have been planning this for 6 months. I planned the location, the words, the time of day. I hired a string quartet. I ordered flowers from London. And then I walked in here and saw you frowning at that petticoat with a needle between your teeth. And I thought, this is the moment, not the performance. This." She put down the petticoat. She put down the needle. She looked at this man, this impossible, stubborn, quietly devastated man who had searched for her for 2 years and courted her in a dress shop and compared her to the moon and sat in an uncomfortable chair every afternoon because it was in the same room as her. And she said, "Yes." He stood. He crossed the small distance between the chair and the workbench. He took her face in his hands, both hands, gentle and warm, his thumbs resting against her cheekbones. And he kissed her. The first kiss, prepared for by everything that had preceded it. Every waltz, every argument about Shakespeare, every margin note, every shared silence, every moment of fear and courage and choosing. It was not gentle, not tentative. He kissed her like a man who had been drowning for 2 years and had finally found air. And she kissed him back. She kissed him back with all the want she had been folding away like fabric every night for 2 years, and the want unfolded now, vast and warm, and filled the room. When they broke apart, she was shaking. He was too. She could feel the fine tremor in his hands against her face, and the vulnerability of it. This man who never trembled, who never showed his seams, made her eyes sting. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Tell me." "I was going to say yes the night of the masquerade. When you asked me to tell you my name, I was going to tell you. I was going to tell you everything. And then I got scared, and I ran. And I spent 2 years regretting it." "I know," he said. "You know?" "I saw it in your face, the moment before you turned away. You were about to stay, and then something, fear, doubt, the voice in your head that tells you that you are not enough, pulled you back. I watched it happen. I have replayed that moment 10,000 times. I'm sorry." "Do not be sorry. Those 2 years taught me something I needed to learn." "What?" "Patience," he said. And then, with the ghost of the almost smile, "I was not very good at it before." She laughed. She was crying and laughing at the same time, and his thumbs were wiping the tears from her cheeks, and the string quartet he had hired was presumably somewhere in the county wondering where they were supposed to go, and her mother was in the front of the shop, listening to every word and pretending she was not. They married in June, in the small stone church in Thornfield, with wildflowers on the altar and the windows thrown open to the summer air. Elara wore a dress she had made herself, white, simple, with silver thread at the cuffs. Her mother sat in the front pew, and wept without apology. Catherine stood beside Nathaniel as his witness, and later told anyone who would listen that she had never seen her brother smile that many times in a single hour. The county adjusted, slowly, grudgingly, and then with a speed that surprised everyone, including Elara, because the truth, the small, stubborn, irreducible truth, was that Elara was good at this. Not at being a duchess, exactly. She was terrible at formal dinners and could never remember which title outranked which. But she was good at the things that mattered. She was good at listening. She was good at seeing people, really seeing them, the way she had seen Nathaniel that first night across a ballroom, recognizing his loneliness because it matched her own. She was good at asking the question that no one else would ask, and at sitting in the silence that followed until the answer came. The tenants liked her. The staff adored her. The vicar's wife, whose petticoat Elara had been hemming when Nathaniel proposed, became her first and fiercest friend in her new life. And Nathaniel, who had been cold and controlled and meticulously walled off for 5 years, began to thaw. Not dramatically. He did not become a different person. He was still quiet, still precise, still the kind of man whose silence filled a room. But the quality of the silence changed. It was no longer the silence of a man who had nothing left to say. It was the silence of a man who was listening, who was present, who had, after a long time in the dark, found his way back to the window where the moon was shining. 3 years after the wedding, a summer evening. The windows of Haverton House were open to the warm air, and the sound of the garden drifted in. Birdsong, the rustle of leaves, the distant, delighted shrieking of a child who had been told it was time for bed and had strong opinions about the matter. Elara stood at the window of the library, watching. In the garden below, Nathaniel was kneeling on the grass, engaged in a negotiation with their daughter, a 2-year-old with her mother's dark hair and her father's grey eyes, and a personality that belonged entirely to herself. The negotiation appeared to be about a frog that the child had found near the pond and intended to keep as a pet. Nathaniel was losing the negotiation. This did not surprise Elara, who had watched him lose every negotiation with their daughter since the day she was born. "The frog is not coming inside," Nathaniel said, with the particular firmness of a man who already knew the frog was coming inside. The child held up the frog. It was a small, green, spectacularly unimpressed frog, and it sat on her palm with the resigned dignity of an amphibian that had accepted its fate. "Frog," the child said with conviction. "Yes, that is a frog. It lives outside." "Frog," the child repeated, and toddled toward the house. Nathaniel looked up at the window. He met Elara's eyes. His expression was one of pure, helpless surrender, the expression of a man who had once commanded half a county and was now being led around his own garden by a 2-year-old with a frog. Elara smiled at him. Not the almost smile from the masquerade. A full smile, wide and unguarded, and blazing with a joy so ordinary and so deep that it could only have been earned. He smiled back, a real smile, the kind of smile she had never seen on his face that first night, the kind of smile that had been buried under 5 years of grief and control, and the particular loneliness of a man who believed he had lost his capacity for love. The smile transformed him. It made him look younger, softer, like the man he might have been if loss had not shaped him so early. It was, she thought, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Not because it was extraordinary, because she had been in the dark so long that she had forgotten what light looked like. Later, after the frog had been installed in a bowl in the nursery over Nathaniel's formal but entirely ineffective objection, after their daughter had been read 3 stories and sung 2 songs, and finally, reluctantly, surrendered to sleep, Elara and Nathaniel sat together in the library. The fire had burned to embers. The house was quiet. She was reading. He was pretending to read. Nathaniel, she said, without looking up. Elara, you are staring at me again. I am studying you. There is a difference. You have been studying me for 3 years. Surely you have finished by now. Not remotely. She looked up. He was watching her with those grey eyes, and in the firelight, the silver flecks looked like sparks, like something burning, steady and warm and constant. She set her book aside. She crossed the small space between their chairs. She sat on the arm of his chair, and he shifted to make room. And his arm came around her waist with the easy, automatic certainty of a gesture repeated 1,000 times. I kept the cloak, she said. The brown one. It is in the back of the wardrobe. I cannot seem to throw it away. Why? She thought about it. Because it reminds me of who I was. And because the distance between who I was and who I am now is the measure of what you gave me. Not a title, not a house, not a life I never imagined. The courage to stop hiding. That is what you gave me. And I do not want to forget how much that cost. He was quiet. His arm tightened around her waist. His thumb moved. Once a single, slow stroke against her side. The same gesture, always the same gesture. Their private language, spoken in a single touch. You gave me something too, he said. What? A reason to stay. She leaned into him. He held her. The fire crackled. The house settled into its nightly sounds. Old wood, warm stone, the particular quiet of a home that is full. In the nursery upstairs, their daughter slept with one hand curled around the edge of her blanket, dreaming whatever dreams are dreamed by small, fierce girls who believe that frogs belong indoors. In the garden, the moon rose over the old trees, ordinary and commonplace and beautiful, casting its light through the open window and across the floor of the library, where 2 people sat together in the kind of silence that is not empty, but full of everything they had survived, everything they had chosen, everything they had become. She had worn a servant's cloak to hide from him, and he had found her anyway. Not because the cloak failed, but because some things, the sound of a laugh, the scar on a finger, the weight of a silver ring, the particular quality of a silence shared between 2 people who recognize each other across a crowded room, cannot be hidden by any fabric, no matter how shapeless, no matter how thick. Some things, once found, refuse to be lost again. If this story stayed with you, if it wrapped around your heart the way it wrapped around mine, then subscribe, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from, and share this with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to stop hiding and let yourself be found. I will see you in the next one.